Hey, I keep thinking I need to come up with a catchphrase, like at the beginning or the end, that I say, because so many creators have those and I think it's so cool, but I haven't thought of one yet, so hopefully when I think of one, the people that have stayed since like the beginning this time, they're gonna remember when it wasn't there and you'll feel exclusive or something, but I'm just still thinking about it. Anyway, I actually got a request to cover this topic in my stories this month. If you ever want to request a podcast topic, I do ask once a month on my Instagram stories. It's ABSTABBS if you don't follow me there, what topics you're interested in. And I pretty much cover every single one because I do this for you all. And so I'm going to cover every single one pretty much. Anyway, the person that requested this, the little suggestion box said, making friends within the church because of OCD. And I know that this topic could go in a million different directions, really, but I'm gonna share with you where my mind went. Because when this was said, my first thought was that when you have religious scrupulosity OCD and you're in church, you can feel like when you're sitting there, you're the only one experiencing the symptoms that you are. I'm specifically thinking about if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Relief Society. If you're not part of that church, it's when all the women meet together, and it's basically like Sunday school for women. And that always just feels like the most comfortable place for me to, if I'm gonna open up about anything, to open up about it at church. But also sometimes just in those settings, or whether you're in like a sacrament meeting or just normal Sunday school, people will say things and you're like, I have never felt that. I don't feel that way. How are you so perfect? And it's hard sometimes to connect with people when you feel like you think about things so differently. And I remember even feeling a lot at the time that talking about my struggles was taboo because no one knows about scrupulosity OCD. Like, they just don't. People didn't even know about any other kind of OCD except cleanliness, contamination OCD when I was a teenager, and I'm only 28. Whether you're just talking about general struggles with self-esteem, that feels a little safer, but when you start talking about intrusive thoughts or compulsions, or how religion in general, those behaviors start to become compulsions, it's hard to even know how to make friends that relate to you on that, or how to open up, because to some people, when you try to explain scrupulosity OCD, they're just deer in the headlights. And it sounds so outlandish to them that they're in their head like, I don't know if that's real, to be honest. However, I just want to pose an idea. Have you ever had an experience where somebody in a church setting has opened up about honestly anything, and there was a negative reaction? Because I was racking my brain trying to think of a time where there was a negative reaction to anyone being vulnerable, and I really couldn't. The only time I could think of was when somebody was maybe doing it over the pulpit in front of the whole church, and people were like, okay, not the time or place. And even then, it wasn't necessarily negative. I feel like opening up within that setting often leads to positive reactions. However, I want to say, just because I have not experienced that does not mean it doesn't happen. I'm not saying that at all. I definitely want to acknowledge the negative experiences that people have had, for sure. I just think it's interesting, if you're feeling scared to try to open up or make friends within the church because of your OCD, I feel like there's a pretty high chance that there's going to be compassion that you're met with. At least I would hope so, or at least in the congregations I've been a part of, that has been the case. And even further than that, if you can remember any other times where somebody else has opened up within a religious setting, how you felt. Because I'd be willing to bet that 99.9% of the time you felt, wow, I feel so seen. I'm so glad they were authentic. I'm so glad for this reminder that everyone has something, or that I'm not alone in this. And so I just feel like those reminders are so powerful as kind of like a little courage to help you feel more comfortable opening up about those things. However, I did want to share a couple of experiences in this podcast episode about times where I've kind of been put in a place where my scrupulosity OCD was affecting something and I did not know what to say or what to do. And just to acknowledge how difficult that might be, and then at the end wrap up with how the outcomes can help you have some ideas of how to make church with friends because of your OCD. So the first one, it was, I want to say about a year ago. We had just moved, not into this place, but the last place we rented. And we moved pretty much at a time where my scrupulosity had gotten to a place where I basically told my husband, like, I'm not going to be going to church every week. I'm just not. And that was an exposure for me because I used to get so anxious I couldn't function if I didn't go to church for whatever reason, even if I was sick. So it started as an exposure. And that was right at the time we moved in. So I think the first month or two we attended church maybe every other week or so, and then it just kind of slowly went down. And when I was at church, I was walking the halls a lot of the time because my anxiety was just so high. And I was just kind of in survival mode. Eventually, my husband got a text message from the leadership in the ward. I believe it was the bishop, and then I don't know which counselor it was, but I know for sure it was the bishop. And they wanted to come over and visit, and I was not down with that, but me and my husband, we just didn't answer. I know that's bad, but we didn't know how to say, we didn't want to be rude and be like, no. So we just didn't reply, but anyway, they ended up showing up anyway, which is fine. And they came in and we chatted for a little bit, and then eventually they asked us if we would be okay with getting a calling, which I did think was a little bit odd because to them we're very less active. I see what they were trying to do, I suppose, but my body just tensed up, and I was like, that is my worst nightmare, because right before we had moved, I was a Sunday school teacher for the youth, and I was about to ask to be released because I just could not handle it with how my OCD was going. And I surprised myself because before my husband could answer, I just said, me personally, I'm not speaking for my husband here, but I personally don't feel comfortable with that right now because, and I felt like I had to give a reason, and you don't always have to do this, but I just said, because I have this condition. I don't know if you've heard of Obsessive-Compulsive disorder, but I have a form of OCD that just involves religion. And I started treatment for that recently, and it just makes going to church really difficult because I'm just starting over, basically. And I could tell they'd never heard of it, which is totally fine. They were very nice, and they basically, just to try and understand, they were like, so basically you struggle with being too hard on yourself. And I was like, that's a great way to put it. And I just am not in a place right now. But again, I'm sure my husband, he can speak for his own self. Anyway, they were super nice about it. And then I ended up getting a text message from one of their wives asking to basically meet up and be friends. So it was generally, it was a positive experience. Scary to open up, scary to know what to say. But I think if the situation is right, even if it's just a little tiny comment you can make in a lesson, and maybe you don't even have to call it scrupulosity OCD, you can use a general term like perfectionism or being too hard on yourself. You don't have to give them the whole spiel. That can help people who also experience that to feel comfortable coming to you and relating to you in that way. My second experience, this is a little bit more niche to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but about 8 or 9 months into me meeting with my OCD therapist, my temporary recommend expired. And this was before I was still attending church regularly. I was struggling with some other things, but not necessarily the church thing. And I didn't feel like I could do the temple recommend interview. And for those who don't know what that is, basically to enter this temple, the temple, which is a sacred building for members of this church, you have to have like a slip of paper that says you are worthy to enter. So they ask you questions like, do you believe in God? Do you sustain the prophet? Do you pay your tithing? Do you blah, like those types of things. As I had started my exposure and response prevention therapy, realized how much of my religious behaviors were just part of the OCD cycle. I started to doubt everything. I was like, what do I believe? I don't know what's going on. And the thought of going into the interview and having them ask me if I believed in God was just too much for me, because I didn't know. I just didn't know, and I had so many complicated feelings, and I was talking to my therapist about it, and I just said, I explained everything I just said to you guys, and she said, first of all, I do think temple recommend interviews are just unfair for people with scrupulosity OCD in general, because those questions can be taken so differently for people with minds like ours. And she advised me to just go into the office and answer yes to every question, because I know my intentions, and just basically get through it. And she said if I wanted, I could explain it, but she said they may not understand, and it may be better to just go in there and say yes. I ended up not doing the temple recommend interview, and that's a whole other story. But I remember being a little sad because it was so difficult to explain scrupulosity OCD in a way that I felt other people would understand, because I wanted to be understood. I didn't want to go in there and just say yes to every question. I wanted to feel seen and have my experience be validated, and it was sad for me to feel like this is too complicated for me to explain to people, and they might think I'm just making it up. And so I share that story because I also understand, on one side, yes, you're probably going to be met with compassion. On the other side, it can be scary and frustrating. And so I think it all just starts with maybe making one small comment in a lesson, or sharing a small, like, couple sentences in a talk if you're invited to. It's just kind of like throwing a bone out there. And if people relate, then they can come, you know, or if you hear someone else share something. Because I think it just helps to go to church with somebody who knows what's happening in your mind and what it's like for you. And I think it's more than possible to make friends with people. Even when I started this account, when I started talking on social media about scrupulosity OCD, I had several people that I knew in my past who reached out to me and said they had the same thing, and we just didn't know. Because, again, they probably feel like they couldn't talk about it, and I wasn't diagnosed yet. So you just never know. And there's always people who want to understand and be there for you. And in the meantime, I would love to be your friend, but when you're ready, I think those are some great ways to kind of open the door to making friends at church because of your OCD. And that's all I have for you. So I will talk to you guys next week. Thank you so much for being here.